It has become clear to me in my travels in the region over the decades that more and more people across the Arab world understood the game. And they knew that this false narrative that Jews are not legitimately there and that somehow we have to focus all of our energy in the Arab world on combating this evil interloper, it's nonsense. And it's become increasingly clear that, in fact, Israel can be a partner.
In September 2020, the world saw what had been years, decades in the making. Landmark peace agreements dubbed the Abraham Accords, normalizing relations between Israel and two Arabian Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Bahrain. Later in December, they were joined by the Kingdom of Morocco. 5 years later, AJC is pulling back the curtain to meet key individuals who built the trust that led to these breakthroughs. Introducing the Architects of Peace. On the eve of the signing of the Abraham Accords, AJC Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer Jason Isaacson found himself traveling to the end of a tree-filled winding road in McLean, Virginia, to sip tea on the back terrace with Bahraini Ambassador Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid Al Khalifa and Bahrain's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani.
Sitting in the backyard of the Bahraini ambassador's house with Dr. Al Zayani, the foreign minister of Bahrain, and with Sheikh Abdullah, the ambassador, and hearing what was about to happen the next day on the south lawn of the White House was a thrilling moment, and really, in many ways, just a validation of the work that AJC has been doing for many years, before I came to the organization and the time that I've spent with AJC since the early 90s. This possibility of Israel's true integration in the region, Israel's cooperation and peace with its neighbors, with all of its neighbors, this was clearly the threshold that we were standing on.
If you're wondering how Jason ended up sipping tea in such esteemed company the night before his hosts made history, wonder no more. Here's the story.
The people of Israel look to this palace with great anticipation and expectation. We pray that this meeting will mark the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Middle East, that it will signal the end of hostility, violence, terror, and war, that it will bring dialogue, accommodation, coexistence, and, above all, peace.
That was Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir speaking in October 1991 at the historic Madrid Peace Conference, the first time Israel and Arab delegations engaged in direct talks toward peace. It had taken 43 years to reach this point, 43 years since the historic United Nations resolution that created separate Jewish and Arab states, a resolution Jewish leaders accepted, but Arab states scorned. Not even 24 hours after Israel declared its independence on May 14, 1948, the armies of Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria attacked the new Jewish state, which fought back mightily and expanded its territory. The result? A deep-seated distrust among Israel, its neighboring nations, and some of the Arab residents living within Israel's newly formed borders. Though many Palestinian Arabs stayed, comprising over 20% of Israel's population today, hundreds of thousands of others left or were displaced. Meanwhile, in reaction to the rebirth of the Jewish state, and over the following 2 decades, Jewish communities long established in Arab states faced hardship and attacks, forcing Jews by the hundreds of thousands to flee. Israel's War of Independence set off a series of wars with neighboring nations, terrorist attacks, and massacres. Peace in the region saw more than a few false starts, with one rare exception. In 1979, after the historic visit to Israel by Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, he and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin joined President Jimmy Carter for negotiations at Camp David and signed a peace treaty that for the next 15 years remained the only formal agreement between Israel and an Arab state. In fact, it was denounced uniformly across the Arab world. But 1991 introduced dramatic geopolitical shifts. The collapse of the Soviet Union, which had severed relations with Israel during the Six-Day War of 1967, diminished its ability to back Syria, Iraq, and Libya. In the USSR's final months, it re-established diplomatic relations with Israel, but left behind a regional power vacuum that extremists started to fill. Meanwhile, most Arab states, including Syria, joined the successful U.S.-led coalition against Saddam Hussein that liberated Kuwait, solidifying American supremacy in the region and around the world. The Palestine Liberation Organization, which claimed to represent the world's Palestinians, supported Iraq and Libya. Seizing an opportunity, the U.S. and the enfeebled but still relevant Soviet Union invited to Madrid a joint Jordanian-Palestinian delegation, along with delegations from Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and Israel. Just 4 months before that Madrid meeting, Jason Isaacson had left his job on Capitol Hill to work for the American Jewish Committee. At that time, AJC published a magazine titled Commentary, enabling Jason to travel to the historic summit with media credentials and hang out with the press pool.
It was very clear in just normal conversations with these young Arab journalists who I was spending some time with that there was the possibility of an openness that I had not realized existed. There was a possibility of kind of a sense of common concerns about the region that was kind of refreshing and was sort of running counter to the narratives that have dominated conversations in that part of the world for so long. And it gave me the sense that by expanding this circle of relationships that I was just starting with in Madrid, we might be able to make some progress. We might be able to find some partners with whom AJC could develop a real relationship.
AJC had already begun to build ties in the region in the 1950s, visiting Arab countries like Morocco and Tunisia, which had sizable Jewish populations. The rise in Arab nationalism in Tunisia and rebirth of Israel eventually led to an exodus that depleted the Jewish community there. Immigration depleted Morocco's Jewish community as well.
To say that somehow this is not the native land of the Jewish people is just flying in the face of the reality. And yet that was the propaganda line that was pushed out across the region. Of course, Madrid opened a lot of people's eyes, but that wasn't enough. More had to be done. There were very serious efforts made by the U.S. government, Israeli diplomats, Israeli business people, and my organization, which played a very active role in trying to introduce people to the reality that they would benefit from this relationship with Israel. So it was pushing back against decades of propaganda and lies. And that was one of the roles that we assigned to ourselves and have continued to play.
No real negotiations took place at the Madrid conference. Rather, it opened conversations that unfolded in Moscow, in Washington, and behind closed doors in secret locations around the world. Progress quickened under Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. In addition to a peace treaty between Israel and Jordan reached in 1994, secret talks in Norway between Israel and PLO resulted in the Oslo Accords, a series of agreements signed in 1993 and 1995 that ended the First Intifada after 6 years of violence and laid out a 5-year timeline for achieving a two-state solution. Extremists tried to derail the process. A Jewish extremist assassinated Rabin in 1995, and a new terror group launched a series of suicide attacks against Israeli civilians. Formed during the First Intifada, these terrorists became stars of the Second. They called themselves Hamas. On March 27, 2002, Hamas sent a suicide bomber into an Israeli hotel where 250 guests had just been seated for a Passover Seder. He killed 30 people and injured 140 more. The day after the deadliest suicide attack in Israel's history, the Arab League, a coalition of 22 Arab nations in the Middle East and Africa, unveiled what it called the Arab Peace Initiative, a roadmap offering wide-scale normalization of relations with Israel, but with an ultimatum: no expansion of Arab-Israeli relations until the establishment of a Palestinian state within the pre-1967 armistice lines and a so-called right of return for Palestinians who left and their descendants. As the Second Intifada continued to take civilian lives, the Israeli army soon launched Operation Defensive Shield to secure the West Bank and parts of Gaza. It was a period of high tension, conflict, and distrust. But behind the scenes, Jason and AJC were forging ahead, building bridges, and encountering an openness in Arab capitals that belied the ultimatum.
It has become clear to me in my travels in the region over the decades that more and more people across the Arab world understood the game. And they knew that this false narrative that Jews are not legitimately there and that somehow we have to focus all of our energy in the Arab world on combating this evil interloper. It's nonsense. And it's become increasingly clear that, in fact, Israel can be a partner of Arab countries.
Jason led delegations of Jewish leaders to Arab capitals, oversaw visits by Arab leaders to Israel, and cultivated relationships of strategic and political consequence with governments and civil society leaders across North Africa, the Levant, and the Arabian Peninsula. In 2009, King Mohammed VI of Morocco bestowed on him the honor of Chevalier of the Order of the Throne of the Kingdom of Morocco. Jason's priority was nurturing one key element missing from Arab-Israeli relations, an element that for decades had been absent in most Middle East peace negotiations: trust.
Nothing is more important than developing trust. And trust and goodwill are, if not synonymous, are so closely linked that, yes, I mean, a lot of these discussions that AJC has been engaged in over many years have been all about not only developing a set of contacts we can turn to when there's a crisis or when we need answers to questions or when we need to pass a message along to a government, but also develop, a sense that we all want the same thing. And we trust each other that if someone is prepared to take certain risks to advance the prospect of peace, which will involve risk, which will involve vulnerability, that a neighbor who might have demonstrated in not so distant past animosity and hostility toward Israel can be trusted to take a different course.
A number of Israeli diplomats and business people also worked toward that goal. While certain diplomatic channels in the intelligence and security spheres stayed open out of necessity, other diplomats and business people with dual citizenship traveled across the region, quietly breaking down barriers, starting conversations, and building trust.
I would run into people in Arab capitals from time to time who were fulfilling that function and, traveling with different passports that they had legitimately because they were from those countries, that it was just a handful of people in governments that would necessarily know that they were there and they were maintaining this ongoing contact. So yes, if that sounds like cloak and dagger, it's kind of a cloak and dagger operation, but it's really just a way for people to maintaining a relationship and building a relationship until the society is ready to accept the reality that it will be in their country's best interest to have that relationship.
Privately, behind the scenes, signs emerged that some Arab leaders understood the role that Jews have played in the region's history for millennia and the possibilities that would exist if Muslims and Jews could restore some of the faith and friendship of bygone years.
I remember sitting with King Mohammed VI of Morocco just weeks after his ascension to the throne, so going back more than a quarter century, and hearing him talk with me and AJC colleagues about the 600,000 subjects that he had in Israel. Of course, these were Jews, Israelis of Moroccan descent, who are in the hundreds of thousands. But the sense that these countries really have a common history.
Common history, yes. Common goals, too. And not for nothing, a common enemy. The same extremist forces that have been bent on Israel's destruction have not only disrupted Israeli-Arab peace, they've prevented the Palestinian people from thriving in a state of their own, and now threaten the security and stability of the entire region.
We are hopeful that in partnership with those in the Arab world who feel the same way about the need to push back against extremism, including the extremism promoted, promulgated, funded, armed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, that we can have enough of a network of supportive players in the Arab world, in the West, working with Israel and working with Palestinian partners who are interested in the same future, a real future, a politically free future, where we can actually make some progress. And that's an ongoing effort. And this is a point that we made consistently over many years. If you want to help the Palestinian people, and we want to help the Palestinian people, but if you, fill in the blank, Arab government official, your country wants to help the Palestinian people, you're not helping them by pretending that Israel doesn't exist. You're not helping them by isolating Israel, by making Israel a pariah in the minds of your people. You will actually have leverage with Israel, and you'll help the Palestinians when they're sitting at a negotiating table across from the Israelis if you engage Israel. if you have access to the Israeli officials and they have a stake in your being on their side on certain things and working together on certain common issues.
Jason says more and more Arab leaders are realizing, with some frustration, that isolating Israel is a losing proposition for all the parties involved. It has not helped the Palestinian people. It has not kept extremism at bay. And it has not helped their own countries and their own citizens prosper. In fact, the limitations that isolating Israel imposes have caused many countries to lag behind the tiny Jewish state.
I think there was just this sense of how far back we have fallen, how much ground we have to make up. We need to break out of the old mindset and try something different. But they were saying that before the Abraham Accords. They were saying it in the years leading up to the Abraham Accords, with increasing frustration for the failure of Palestinian leadership to seize opportunities that had been held out to them. But frankly, also contributing, I think, to this was this insistence on isolating themselves from a naturally synergistic relationship with a neighboring state right next door that could contribute to the welfare of their societies, that it just didn't make a whole lot of sense, and it denied them the ability to move forward.
Jason remembers the first time he heard an Arab official utter the words out loud, expressing a willingness, dare say desire, to partner with Israel.
It took a long time, but I could see in 2016, 17, 18, 19, this growing awareness, and finally hearing it actually spoken out loud in one particular conference that I remember going to in 2018 in Bahrain by a senior official from an Arab country. It took a long time for that lesson to penetrate, but it's absolutely the case.
In 2019, Bahrain hosted an economic summit where the Trump administration presented its Peace to Prosperity plan, a $50 billion investment proposal to create jobs and improve the lives of Palestinians while also promoting regional peace and security. Palestinians rejected the plan outright and refused to attend. Bahrain invited Israeli media to cover the summit. That September, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, AJC presented its Architect of Peace Award to the Kingdom of Bahrain. Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, Bahrain's Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, told Jason that it was important to learn the lessons of the late Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and late Jordanian King Hussein, both of whom signed peace treaties with Israel. He also explained the reason why Bahrain invited Israeli media.
President Anwar Sadat did it. He broke a huge barrier. He was a man of war. He's leader of a country that fought a war or two with Israel. But then he knew at the right moment that he would want to go straight to Israel and talk to them. And we fulfilled also something that we've always wanted to do. We've discussed it many times. Talking to the Israeli public through Israeli media. Why not talk to the people? They wake up every day, they have their breakfast watching their own TV channels, and they read their own papers and read their own media, and they form their own opinion. Absolutely. Nobody should shy away from talking to the media. We are trying to get our point across in order to convince. Or how will you do it? There's no language of silence. You'll have to talk, and you'll have to remove all those barriers. And with that, trust can be built.
Jason had spent decades building that trust, and the year to come yielded clear results. In May and June 2020, UAE Ambassador to the UN Lana Nusseibeh and UAE Minister of State Dr. Anwar Gargash both participated in AJC webinars to openly discuss cooperation with Israel, a topic once considered taboo. So when the Abraham Accords were signed a few months later, for Jason and AJC colleagues who had been on this long journey for peace, it was a natural progression, though no less dramatic. Sitting with Minister Al Khalifa's successor, Dr. Al-Zayani, and the Bahraini ambassador on the evening before the White House ceremony, it was time to drink a toast to a new chapter of history in the region.
I don't think that would have been possible had there not been decades of contacts that had been made by many people, roving Israeli diplomats and Israeli business people, usually operating, in fact, maybe always operating with passports from other countries, traveling across the region, and frankly, our work and the work of a limited number of other people who were in non-governmental positions, some journalists, authors, scholars, business people, and we certainly did a great deal of this over decades, would speak with leaders in these countries and influential people who were not government officials, and opening up their minds to the possibility of the advantages that would accrue to their societies by engaging Israel and by better understanding the Jewish people and who we are, what we care about, who we are not, because there's, of course, a great deal of decades, I should say centuries and millennia, of misapprehensions and lies about the Jewish people. So clearing away that baggage was a very important part of the work that we did, and I believe that others did as well. We weren't surprised. We were pleased. We applauded the Trump administration, the president and his team for making this enormous progress on advancing regional security and peace, prosperity. We are now hoping that we can build on those achievements of 2020 going forward and expanding fully the integration of Israel into its neighborhood.
Next episode, we hear how the first Trump administration developed its Middle East policy and take listeners behind the scenes of the high-stakes negotiations that yielded the Abraham Accords. Thank you for listening. Atara Lakritz is our producer. TK Broderick is our sound engineer. Special thanks to Jason Isaacson, John Schweitzer, Sean Savage, and the entire AJC team for making this series possible. You can subscribe to Architects of Peace on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can learn more at ajc.org/Architects of Peace. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. You can reach us at podcasts@ajc.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to spread the word and hop onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify to rate us and write a review to help more listeners find us.